Hey everyone, this is EchoSoundWorks with ADSR, and in this video, we'll be talking about groove and how you can use groove to make your music more interesting and more polished. So we'll be looking at specifically how you can add more groove to your hi-hat patterns. Now, first things first, what's groove? Well, groove is an idea, concept that comes up in pretty much any genre of music. You can basically distill it down to something that's called swing, which we'll cover a little bit more in depth in this video, but you can also think of groove as this feeling of change with the rhythmic elements in your music. It makes your listener bob their head in different ways, right? You could use groove to make your listener feel basically the pulse of the beat all on downbeats. You can add groove to accentuate upbeats. There's a lot of different things you can do with groove. So here's an example of a track with a hi-hat pattern that has groove. And here's an example of a hi-hat pattern that has no groove. So it is pretty obvious right away that there's a difference between these two. So let's figure out how to create groove with our hi-hat patterns. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go into this hi-hat pattern and start to tweak the velocity of some of the hits. The kick happens right on the downbeat, so there's really no point in having my first hit be really loud. So I'm gonna bring up my velocity tool and we're gonna make this about 50 velocity, so it's pretty quiet. Now I'm gonna make this one kind of middle of the road, so we might keep this at about 80. This one's gonna be a little bit harder. Let's make that about 110. And then we're gonna bring this one down to about 80 as well. So we're going soft, medium, hard, medium, and then we're gonna go back to soft, right? And we're gonna kind of repeat this pattern. All right, so I don't know how much I like the hits that are in the 110, so we're gonna turn that down just a little bit. All right, so let's move on to the next concept, which is swing. Now, pretty much every DAW has their own way of handling swing, but I'll show you how to do it manually just so you know exactly what's going on. So if you wanted to apply swing to a hi-hat pattern manually, you're gonna go to every other note, you're gonna highlight them, and I'm holding down Shift, and that will be pretty universal for every DAW. You're gonna go every other note, and then what you're gonna do is you're gonna nudge that note off of the grid. Now, you're not gonna nudge it before the grid, you're gonna nudge it after. So this is where the note would hit on an 8th note value, right? I'm not gonna bring it back here. That's gonna make it sound weird and tense. You're gonna take it off of the grid. Now, you can move it just a little bit, you can move it a lot, play around with it, but we're manually adding in swing right now. Now, you don't have to have every note that you're swinging be the same swing. If you want to take it to a real next level, you can go in and change and tweak each one. So that's going to add another level to the groove. It's going to humanize the pattern, because if you think about a human playing a hi-hat on a real drum kit, if they try to add swing, it's not ever going to be perfect, right? So that being said, a lot of DAWs have a way to achieve swing, and I can do that with this swing here. So I've already quantized this to an 8th note value, right? Now if I add swing, watch what happens to the notes here. If we highlight all the notes and I drag this up, you'll see that every other note is moving. Now, if I crank it up to 100, it is a lot of swing. It almost is like there's a triplet feeling. It just doesn't have that third hit for the triplet. So that's way too much, obviously. So I'm gonna dial it back. All right, so now we're gonna dive a little bit deeper into the process. We're actually gonna pull up the sampler that's been housing this sample. So I pulled in one hi-hat sample into Logic's Drum Machine Designer, which is just an instrument or a plugin for handling drums if you're not a Logic user. So the actual sample that I'm using is quite a bit longer than we've been hearing. If we go to the actual sample waveform, you can see that there's a good amount of tail on this hi-hat. Now I like, especially with house, techno, anything that's 4 on the floor, I like using closed hi-hat samples that are a little bit longer in length because it allows me to do what I'm about to show you. So I went to the actual sample here and I turned down the decay on this. So when you hear this, it sounds like a really short hi-hat. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna use what's called modulation to open up the decay so we hear a little bit more of that sample when we hit the note or the hi-hat harder, which we've already done. We've already programmed in our velocity and our dynamic changes. All right, so I'm gonna use a source and a target. We're gonna use the velocity as the source because I want the velocity to tell this plugin when I hit it harder, open up that decay on the envelope. So I'm gonna set the target to the amp envelope decay. So now when I turn this up, if I hit it soft versus hard, you hear the actual decay of the hi-hat now. I'm also gonna add that same mod setup to the release of our envelope. So we're just gonna select amp envelope release, and it's gonna be a little bit less than the decay, but now the release and the decay will basically open up like this. You just won't see that happening visually with the sampler, but that essentially will be what's happening when we have these harder hits. Now take a listen to our hi-hat pattern. So let's do it. Let's actually turn up the velocity a little bit more. And let's listen to it in context. All right, so the last thing we're going to look at is adding in other sounds that accentuate the groove you've already created. Now, this could be as simple as adding an open hi-hat on certain hits, or it could be as complex as bringing in an open hi-hat, a shaker, a tambourine, other percussive elements. So I've already done that because it took a few minutes to set up, but basically I just dragged in some different samples, chopped up a loop with those samples to create more of a groove. So you can see on my MIDI, the MIDI that we've been creating and working with this whole video up until this point, you see that there are now gaps and holes in it. All I've done is I've just muted some of the notes because now I have another percussive element, whether it's an open hi-hat or a shaker, for instance, on that section of the grid. So I just muted it. So let's listen to our kick and hi-hat now. And with the music, since I met you, right, we have a nice groove going with this track. So that's going to sum up this video. If you have any questions or comments, post those below and someone from the ADSR team will get back to you. If you guys like this video, hit that like button. If you guys want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the ADSR channel and smash that notification bell so you get an update when we release a new video.